Hey everybody, today we are debating whether or not morality proves God, and we're starting right now. Hey friends, thrilled to have you here as we have these two gentlemen here ready to debate one of the deeper, more meaningful questions of life. And so I am thrilled about this. Glad you guys are here. Thanks so much. And if you're new here to Modern Day Debate, well, I just ask you to consider, maybe if you want to consider hitting that subscribe button. We have plenty more debates coming up. And our goal is to basically build an ideologically diverse community here, where it's kind of like, hey, different people, different views, Christian, atheist, no matter what you are, we're glad you're here, and we strive to produce a nonpartisan platform, which means if we ever have a video where somebody's arguing a position, we're always going to have somebody else arguing that opposite position in that video. Otherwise, we're just not going to have it. So we don't have any type of, don't get me wrong, YouTube channels that do have that, awesome. But for us, we always want to have two views debating. So with that, let's get to introducing our debaters, who we're glad to have here. These guys have been supportive of the channel. They've been really helpful, and just we're thrilled to have them back. So Candor Man is actually linked below down in the description, and he's described himself as a kind of an average Joe who likes having meaningful discussions on the big questions of life. And you all, if you've been here before, you may remember Skyout, who is, you might say, bold to say the least. We're glad to have you here as well, Skyout. And so I want to say first to the debaters, thanks so much for coming back.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thank you, James.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James.
You betcha. And with that, we have already discussed beforehand who's going to go first. So I will let the speakers take it from there. Candor Man has produced, basically done a little bit of writing on this that he wants to kick us off with, if I remember right. And
yeah,
thank you for that. I will almost always forget this. If you have a question for one of the speakers, feel free to put in the live chat at Modern Day Debate for your start of your question, and then your question and whoever debater it's for, and we will compile that list and ask them live during the stream at the end of their civil discourse. So glad you're here, and Candor Man, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
First I want to ask, is my video playing, or is it just the logo?
Got the logo. Would you like your video?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more compelling.
You betcha. I'll pull it up.
While you're setting that up, I'll go ahead and read the quick thing I wrote. I wrote this about 30 minutes ago. It's not going to be fully comprehensive, and it may have some errors, but bear with me. We'll deal with it when they come up. So I found that the whole moral argument for the existence of God is an appeal to consequences fallacy. A theist who uses such an argument is not satisfied with the idea that morality can be described as an agreement between people on which actions we should take and which actions we should avoid regarding some specified goal. The most common questions I see theists ask who accept the validity of the moral argument for the existence of God are, how do you know X action is truly wrong? And if morals are just subjective agreements between people, then how do you tell Hitler or some other evil figure they were wrong? Now, the problem with the first question is that without any context or accepted goal, the word wrong doesn't contain with it any meaning. It's completely devoid of information and can be rejected in the same way you'd reject a question like, why does car? The second question is equally nonsensical for the same reason. But in a world without God, and in one where societies subjectively accept morals, we would expect to see three things. We would see society stopping what they call evil because it's a threat to them. We would see society stopping what they call evil because of how seeing that evil makes them feel. And lastly, we would see societies not trying to stop that evil at all. This, you'll notice, is the world in which we live. So not only would a theist who uses the moral argument for the existence of God need to describe how it makes sense to call an action wrong without first agreeing on a goal, but they would also need to demonstrate a way in which subjectively accepted goals doesn't fully explain the phenomenon we see in the world, or how some kind of objective morality would explain it better. That's it.
Okay. Very nice. I guess I have the floor, James?
You bet.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm Skyle. Just to let you know, I'm here for all the believers around the world that love God and come from the highest quality theological arguments and are real Christians on the planet. And I perfected my arguments to a science, and I'm very accurate and very calculated, and I come from that highest quality of theological arguments that reflect the royalty of Jesus Christ. The highest gold and white gold, silver and platinum is a reflection of the theological argument that I bring to the table. And we're here today to talk to Condor Man about he said it's an agreement on what we can ground morality. And we're going to be discussing the grounding for morality. Is that absolute in the absence of God? Can we ground morality in empathy? Can we just simply wake up tomorrow morning and if I suddenly don't believe in God, will I go out and hurt someone? What grounds morality would be empathy and your conscience and your heart. You can just say, I choose not to hurt someone. You can simply say that do unto those that do unto you, the golden rule. But there's no objective standard or ultimate standard or no absolute reference in the absence of God to say that empathy grounds morality. So I would love to hear from Condor Man what he thinks about that. And of course, I'm 5-0 right now in my debates. We train every day. We are weaponized. We've never lost. We train hard for staff, the Christ Ministries team. And this is all for the believers in the world, that for God, and I'm the best at this, the best ever. And I will take on any atheist that anyone else can be number two. It's okay. I'll let you. I'm the best ever from the realest Christian on the planet. And thank you very much. Go ahead, James.
Oh, you go ahead into the civil discourse. So, Candor Man,
Yeah.
you bet.
So I think one thing I want to tackle is the word you used, standard. When I hear the word standard, I see it to mean a thing that you compare something against to determine a particular value of that thing. For example, right, if I were trying to draw a circle, as close to a circle as I can, I would compare it to a standard of a perfect circle. And perfect circles don't exist in the real world, but you can still use them as a standard. So that's what I see the word standard to mean. And when you say God would be the objective standard, objective in that case would mean something that exists outside of personal opinion or feelings, right?
Well, objective in a sense like the laws of physics and the laws of gravity, laws of oxygen. Those are what I mean by absolute and objective. Like we all know 2 + 2 is 4. It's objective. It's absolute. And in the absence of God, what the atheist position is that they're saying that a natural cause came to have these things like gravity come into existence without a cause. What Christians are trying to say that it's illogically impossible if nothing created the universe. So we're saying that God created oxygen and physics to have objective moral values and different standards of truth. And the word I'd use for standard would pretty much be used in a sense of what you said, an exact measurement of something that we can look at and that we can improve. Anything else?
Okay, so in your view, God is a standard, right? Something to compare our actions against. And God exists in the world in the same way that other real things exist, like as you said, gravity.
Well, let me clarify the argument. I'm saying unless you start with the truth of God, which is the biblical God in theology, what I'm talking about, which is the standard of all truth, you just have a subjective standard or an arbitrary standard by which you could be wrong about everything you know, because you don't have an absolute standard in the absence of God. Like the laws of physics, laws of gravity, those are absolute. That's what I mean by absolute standard. So I use my reasoning and my senses just like you use your reasoning and senses. But we read the Bible that from God, that's my absolute standard. I give me the revelation for my senses and reasoning to read his word. And what we're trying to say is that if you deny knowledge and the truth of God, and you also deny logic, which comes from God. So this is just denying him, or I'm following him and you're not. So you know who God is because he says he knows you, and he says he knows your heart. And it says you're just denying him, or I'm following him and you're not. So you know that God exists. You know who Jesus Christ is. The difference is I'm following him.
Do you mind if I stop you?
Okay.
I hope you're done. So I truly don't feel that anything you said addressed what I was talking about at all.
Go ahead.
And if I misunderstood you, I apologize. I didn't get any meaning from what you said. So is it true that you think God as an objective standard is something that we can compare things to, i.e. a standard, right? And something that exists in the world as a fact, i.e. objective, right? And not subject to feelings. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct, such as morality and creation, yeah. But,
well, I don't know what you mean, such as morality and creation. That like such as doesn't, like, it's a non sequitur and doesn't even make sense.
Well, what I mean that what grounds morality, what grounds things that are clearly objective in a world, like morality. Like, I'm not too sure, how would you ground morality if you woke up tomorrow morning and you know that God does not exist? Would you go out and hurt someone? What would ground your morality?
Can you define ground for me?
Grounding in a sense where, what would stop you from hurting someone tomorrow morning? What reason, if you woke up tomorrow, you know there's no God, what would be your reason not to hurt someone?
Okay, so I feel like the question you just asked is the same as the first question that I mentioned in my intro, right? How do you know X action is truly wrong, right? How do you know X action is one that you necessarily avoid, right? And I think so in a world where God didn't exist, you would have people who got together and wanted, their own well-being and freedoms and create societies. And they would realize that things are contrary to their own well-being and call those wrong. And some people would disagree or get away or think they can get away with it and improve their own well-being at the expense of others. This would be the case if God didn't exist. And that's the world that we see. So what about the world is not described by what I'm saying is how morality works?
Okay. What is your definition of truth?
That which conforms to reality.
Okay, so if that which conforms to reality, your question assumes the truth of my claim. So when you're talking about objective morality and what grounds morality, you said there would be an agreement between society, and there would be an agreement between people, and then they all know that God does not exist. Do you see how that would be subjective and relative and deterministic from Darwinian evolution by natural selection? So there wouldn't be any activity to say that what grounds morality would suddenly be this agreement. They wouldn't be absolute. It would simply be subjective to say, well, I'm going to go ahead and put up these principles and these ideologies and these rules, but it wouldn't be absolute to everyone on the whole planet, like physics,
right,
chemistry, and oxygen. So wouldn't it be...
So what I'm asking... Sorry?
Go ahead.
So what I'm asking is, in a world where morality, as you think I hold, which I'll just accept that you're being accurate here, how would this world look any different if what I thought about morality was not true?
Oh, okay. If you're asking me how would your world be any different if those things were not true? It wouldn't. It's a presupposition and bias, and it's unrealistic to say you're just going to wake up and suddenly live in a world where there's no police, or you don't believe in math, or you don't believe 2 + 2 is 4. So it's unrealistic to have to put up a presupposition and bias to say, like, well, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and I'm not going to believe in these sort of things, when you know that wouldn't be the case. So
I'm sorry, what presupposition are you talking about?
The presupposition that you said that in society there's agreements on what can ground morality, and then you said
I wouldn't say the word ground.
Okay.
Because I'm not fully sure, like, that there's a strong enough that there's like strong information backing up that word. Right? I think it's used a lot, but like, what does ground really mean? So, do you agree with me that it's the case that different societies think different things are correct? Like, our society thinks not killing Jews is a good option, a good thing to do, and Hitler's society thought that killing Jews was a better option, right? You agree that that's the case, that exists in reality right now?
Well, on the one hand, when you want to make value judgments, like the value judgments that, like, for example, these other cultures, the Nazis were wrong, and yet on the other hand, on the other side of your mouth, you're affirming moral cultural relativism. So you have no transcendent anchor for these values, and hence you're lost in a sea of moral cultural relativism. So it's a contradiction in terms.
So you keep saying that I don't have the type of objective morality that you are describing. But what I'm saying is the type of morality that I'm describing is how the world currently works. The morality that I'm describing accurately reflects the phenomenon we see in action, which means it's, likely true. It has explanatory power. And what you're describing as objective morality, like, I'm not even sure it's coherent, right? I was describing that in my intro, right? Like, what does wrong even mean without some agreed upon goal?
Well, let me ask you a specific question.
Sorry. I believe I can finish this train of thought.
Okay.
So not only do you need to describe, right, like what wrong actually means, but you need to describe how your views of morality accurately describe reality, like what we see around us. Because if you just come up with something you call reality, it's like, hey, you don't have this, or if this were the case, then you couldn't, like, that doesn't make it real, right? It's an appeal to consequence. It's essentially, if what you said about morality was true, then then I would be in a world that I did not want to be in, i.e. a world where societies accept what to do and other societies don't, and then there's conflict between them. But I just see that as the world we have. So, like, what about your morality is demonstrably correct about reality?
Well, you basically stated that you were a non-theist. Is it safe to say you're an atheist, or you prefer non-theist?
I think atheist has, recently, at least to me, started coming with a lot more baggage than it used to.
Okay.
I say non-theist to describe the fact that I don't see any good reason to accept that a God exists.
Okay.
It's like atheist, that's fine.
Okay, so you're saying you don't believe that any gods exist. So it seems like when you speak about other gods and goddesses, you said that none of them can exist. On that position, when you say no gods exist, it's not a logical position.
I didn't say no gods exist, right? So that would be a form of the philosophical way that the word atheist is used, which is primarily the reason I've stopped using that word, because I don't like being mischaracterized as someone who says no gods exist, because you can't falsify it.
Okay, so let's go back to the morality, and of course we already confirmed that truth conforms into reality. Of course, I would use the definition that truth conforms into the mind of God, which conforms into reality. So on your view, if there's no real moral dimension, when you say that these things in society, we have to come up with these agreements, and from my understanding, just to put it in my words, from complex sociology and biology, from time and history, from natural selection, from different tribes and hunter-gatherer people, from using tools and during that time period. And it's the same behavior on this non-theistic view. We're just relatively advanced primates, and there really isn't any objective right or wrong to ground morality. I mean, you can say we can make the agreement in society. You can say that we can ground morality in empathy, or if I woke up tomorrow morning and I suddenly didn't believe in God, would I go out and hurt someone? The answer is no, because I choose not to. It's not in my heart. I have empathy. But those things in the absence of God become subjective because they're not absolute. So I'd want to know, what would be your foundation for not to hurt someone in the absence of God? If you knew that to save somebody that you loved, and they said that, well, in order to save this person that you love, you have to torture a baby for fun to save your family. Would that be morally wrong?
Okay, so there's two things to address here. One, it's the same. I just need to restate the same point I made before because I don't feel it's been addressed.
Okay.
You're simply appealing to the consequences again, right? You're saying if my morality was true, then X in some type of situation wouldn't be desirable, and in this case, that situation would be there'd be no objective grounding for morality. So whether or not objective morality for objective grounding for morality even makes sense as a concept, it's still a fallacy. It's an appeal to consequence because you haven't demonstrated how our world, if it were to use if it were to use my subjective morality, assuming it's false, how it would look different than the world we're actually in. Because the way I am using the word morality to describe human actions, it directly maps to what we see around us. So that's the first thing that I'd really like you to address. And the second thing is you're asking me, how do I ground morality? Now, again, I don't really like using the word ground. It doesn't have enough meaning to me. I like using the word morality with a definition that most closely maps to how people actually use the word. I think that's the only way. That's the only way to get a correct definition of a word, right? So when I look around and I see people saying X is moral, X is immoral, I think most of the time, because all language can change, people can use different definitions, but to use,
Sure.
to use the most common definition, i.e. the way the word is used most, is to define morality as an evaluation or a system of evaluation where you are comparing an action to or you are assessing an action's effect on human freedom. And if it is beneficial to human freedom, then it is called moral. And if it is detrimental to human freedom, then it is called immoral. Now, some people will use the word moral with a larger scope to include animals. But that's simply two people using different definitions. So if I were to say eating meat inherently isn't immoral, and a vegan would say, no, eating meat is inherently immoral, that would simply be us describing two different facts. I would be saying eating meat doesn't harm human freedom, and they would be saying eating meat harms animal freedom. So when they're saying eating meat is immoral, they're just saying eating meat is harming sentient being freedom, and that's why they're giving it the label moral. Sure. So the word moral in that case is used to describe two different things, but they're just describing reason we're using the word moral is because that's how people are using it. So that's what you could say grounds my morality, right?
Right.
Human freedom. But really, I'm just defining it as such, and not really grounding it,
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that most morality is relative, and if you're saying that all morality is relative, then it would be absolutely true, then all things would be relative, and even the statement all truth is relative would also be false. So in your sense of what you were explaining, it just sounds like moral cultural relativism when you're saying there are no absolute truths. And when you say that there are no absolute truths is an absolute statement which is supposed to be true. So therefore, an absolute truth and to say there are no absolute truth would be false. So there are no absolute truths, then you cannot believe in anything absolutely at all, including that there are no absolute truths. So therefore, nothing could be really true for you, including relativism. So I would see if what you consider objectively wrong, or you said different forms of morality from society, from different areas, from different forms of truths and things like that, and you said that would ground your morality. Is that right?
I don't think that's right, but it's hard to follow.
Just real quick, because you didn't answer my question a second ago when I asked you if someone kidnapped someone you love. You kind of just went over to your lingo. But what we're trying to say is that what would you consider absolutely morally wrong?
What do you mean by absolute?
Universally accepted around the whole planet.
Nothing.
Nothing?
If that's what you mean by absolute, then people disagree.
So you advocate for child molestation. That's not wrong to you.
What do you mean by wrong?
So by absolutely universally accepted that child molestation is universally accepted on the whole planet, that's wrong, objectively wrong, like the laws of physics. You don't think that's wrong?
What do you mean by wrong?
Absolute.
Do I think that that's absolute? You're saying wrong and absolute are synonyms?
I'm saying that I'm asking you, on your view, as a non-theist, a simple question, is child trafficking wrong according to your world?
Okay. If by wrong you mean
yes or no question?
No, I know, and I'll wait. Just hear me out. If by wrong you mean contrary to human freedom, then yeah, it's wrong. If you mean wrong with no context, right? Just wrong, simply wrong. Like it's a fact that it is wrong without regard to anything. I think that's an incoherent concept. It doesn't make sense to say something is wrong but not have any goal, right? You're trying to satisfy. So.
So you I'm not really too sure. Let me clarify what you're saying. So, for child trafficking, you say that could be okay in certain instances, right?
Definitely not.
Okay, what grounds that? Why?
If, again, I call it wrong and always wrong because it always harms human freedom.
Okay, it always harms human freedom, but what else? What would be number two besides that? Like, what else would child trafficking be wrong besides human freedom? What would be number two? No,
that's what I mean by wrong. By wrong, I mean contrary to the goal of human freedom, right?
Okay, so if human freedom said that it was okay for child trafficking, would that not be wrong according to your view?
What do you mean if human freedom said that? Because human freedom is a fact. It's a state of reality.
If people use their human freedom for child trafficking, their God or their human right, their human freedom for child trafficking, that's not wrong according to you because you're using their human freedom, right?
I'm not saying anytime somebody uses human freedom or their freedom, then that action is no longer wrong. I'm saying anytime human freedom is being limited, by definition, I'm saying that is wrong. Like that's what I mean when I say wrong.
Okay, so human freedom. So according to human freedom, is it wrong for just to basically, if you're walking by a child that was starving, is it morally wrong to not feed a starving child?
Is it morally wrong to not feed a starving child?
Yeah, you have the means to feed the baby, and is it morally wrong not to feed a starving child?
Yes.
What grounds that and why?
Because if you can't afford it, then you are depriving that child of resources on Earth that are available to it, and thus limiting its the child's freedom is limited due to their starving. So because you are depriving them of that resource, that would be immoral, according to my views of morality.
Well, you said if you didn't have money, but let's say you had the means to feed a starving child, would you feed the starving child or would you just walk away? You have the means.
Yeah, so I think I answered this, right? If you had the means and you didn't provide it to this child, then it would be immoral because you're depriving that child of resources which should be available to it. You are essentially the immoral thing would be hoarding resources.
Okay, so hoarding resources. So the person that doesn't feed the starving child, would that be morally wrong according to what you consider morally wrong? If you see someone that has the means to feed a starving child, they walk by the child, they don't do it, is that morally wrong?
Yeah. If by morally wrong, of course.
Okay, why? Why is that wrong?
It's wrong because it's definitionally wrong. It's wrong because it's limiting a child's freedom.
That's circular.
It's what I mean, right?
It's wrong because you just said it's wrong because you said it was wrong, but that doesn't ground it in any absolute sense of morality. It's not objective, but that's what I mean.
Okay, so you're saying it doesn't ground it in some absolute, and again, I don't think any of that has any like coherence to it, but that's just an appeal to consequence. You're saying because it's not absolute, therefore your system of morality isn't an accurate description of how reality currently works, and how the word morality is used and how people interact. Like you've created a world where there's this necessity to act a certain way, and you're saying the world has to be that way because if it wasn't that way, then things would be bad. And that's
what Christians are trying to say is that the argument is that without God, there isn't any absolute measurement or ultimate reference or standard of right and wrong. That's why when I asked you why, you said because it was wrong. But therefore, that what you call moral values are not grounded. They're just spins off of socio-biological evolution. And that's my point on the non-theistic view. That's all moral values are. You're unwilling to accept the idea that anything exists beyond nature, like God, for example. And that's begging the question in favor of non-theism. That is presupposing that non-theism is true without any good evidence. So you have to prove that non-theism is true in order to be logically consistent. So that would be a circular argument when your only reason for believing that non-theism is true is that you already accept the conclusion. And that's what you're doing when you say that non-theism is true, when you say there's nothing to ground morality in the absence of God. So there's no supernatural there. There's no transcendent grounding. That is just presupposing that non-theism is true without any good evidence. So without God, there isn't any absolute standard of right and wrong, and therefore what you call moral values or what grounds moral values, according to non-theism, just spins off from socio-biological evolution, like you said, the agreement in society. And those ramifications of those societies and those agreements, subjective and relative and deterministic. There's no absolute standard. It's not absolute. Everyone has a subjective view. They wouldn't follow those principles or agreements in society. They will do what they want to do, including evil, including killing everyone to help their family. So I don't know, how would you consider that right or wrong?
So I feel like that's the closest you've gotten to describing how you would imagine the world if my if my ideas of morality were incorrect. And
I didn't say you were incorrect. I just said you didn't have a foundation or grounding for morality.
Okay. If I don't have what you call an absolute standard of morality,
yes.
Then what?
Then what? If you don't have then you're lost in a sea of moral cultural relativism. You don't.
What if I am?
Okay, then what if you are lost in a sea of moral cultural relativism? And then,
I would use the word lost, but like, okay, let's say morals are relative in the way I described, right? Societies agree upon things and they call things right or wrong based on the goal that they have prescribed. Let's say that's the case, then what?
Okay, that's the case. You said then what? Those are nice principles, but again, the person that doesn't want to believe in those principles are subject to their own principles that are completely against yours.
Okay.
So what's this?
Okay. So there's a group of people, right, a society who says rape is wrong, and somebody's like, wait a second, that's just a subjective idea. Like that's not based on some ultimate foundation. I'm gonna rape. Like there's no consequence if I can get away with it, right? I'm just gonna do it. Is that not exactly what happens right now? People rape all the time and get away with it. And we as a society call it wrong because it doesn't align with our goals, and thus definitionally it is wrong, but people get away with it. So what you're describing as this, wait, but what if you're right? Then you'd have these negative consequences. Those negative consequences are real. They're happening right now. It seems to be confirming that I'm correct about what the cases of morality is, right?
Well, you're talking about negative consequences. What if the person that rapes someone is actually helping their family or helping another cause to save another person? So I don't know how you would consider those things morally wrong if his principle is like the only way to save my family is to rape this person because they have my loved ones hostage. So I don't know what you would do in that scenario, because there's nothing to ground what's right and wrong in the absence of God. You're saying we have an agreement, we have these principles. What happens if the person that considers rape is morally wrong, and what happens if he goes out and rapes people, and those consequences that you were talking about? I wasn't talking about the consequences. Of course, they are true, and that does happen every day. What I was talking about is that there's nothing to ground those things. It's become subjective. So when you say rape is wrong, there's nothing why? Why is rape wrong according to your worldview? And then you said it's wrong because it's wrong. Well, that's not absolute.
I'm not saying it's wrong because it's wrong. And I'm sorry to cut you off. I apologize.
Go ahead.
I'm not saying it's wrong because it's wrong. I'm saying wrong is the word we use to describe things which are contrary to our prescribed goal when we use the word morality, right? I'm not saying it's wrong because it's wrong. I'm saying wrong is the result of an evaluation comparing it to a standard that we chose. So it's factually true that it is wrong if by wrong you mean contrary to this goal. Now you think, you're saying, oh, but you're essentially saying, who cares if a society calls it wrong? People can do whatever they want. The wrongness doesn't matter because it's subjective. And the fact is, I'll even accept all that. I'll accept that the wrongness doesn't matter. People can just do whatever they want. But that's actually what happens now. And societies that do consider it wrong will stop people from doing that. And to answer your question of, what do we do when somebody needs to do some immoral action, some action that harms human freedom to benefit some larger goal of human freedom, right? Well, what does that person do? These are really tough questions, and it's essentially it needs to be built into what society is thinking, right? And there's multiple things you can think of, and I'm sorry if I'm being a little vague here. If you want me to clarify, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, so what does our society do, right? Our society would say this person can't rape somebody to save his family. Now, why is that, right? A lot of people would think in the trolley problem, yeah, you pull that lever, kill that one person, save 5, right? That's morally correct. And the reason why so many people think this is okay is because it doesn't set any precedent, right? It's not like people are suddenly going to think, wait a second, I should be doing immoral actions if I see some greater limiting freedom occurring. Whereas with the rape situation, that sets a huge, horrible precedent that people should do what they think is immoral to stop some greater harm. Let's say the scenario occurred, right, and somebody did rape their family. Then another rape could occur later on, and somebody could try to justify it with the same reasoning. And then other people would justify it later. And then you have more and more gray area between how much morality or how much limiting of freedom is necessary to warrant a rape. And because of that growing gray area, you start to have more cases where limiting freedom, where the rape is limiting more freedom than is being harmed, and it's more beneficial to a society to limit rape altogether. Because in societies where you have some cases where rape is okay, then tons of unnecessary limiting of freedom will occur. And that's exactly why our society would consider, in this case, rape wrong. And I happen to agree with why our society calls it wrong.
Okay, when you said the society calls rape wrong, why would that be wrong, and what grounds that? Like, what do you mean by rape is wrong according to your worldview?
Okay, so I feel like I've answered this like 3 times. Do you remember what the answer that I gave? Maybe you can paraphrase it so I know we're on the right track, or do you honestly just not remember?
No, you said that there was agreement among society and certain principles that are in society and things like that we can agree on. But my point being is that there's no ultimate standard or no absolute standard for those things to be true. They become subjective and relative and deterministic when you say we have to follow these certain principles and the consequences in the world just happen. Rape happens all the time. I heard what you were talking about, but if you're saying that there's nothing wrong with that, why is that not wrong? There's nothing to ground that when you say those things are wrong. What is the moral argument being made there? So basically, when you say that when there's such a thing as good, you're saying there's such a thing as evil, but what is the moral law to differentiate between what's evil and what's good? So there's got to be a moral lawgiver and an absolute standard and objective.
I really feel like you're not listening to what I'm saying. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't mean to be insulting. You're asking what makes it wrong? Like what makes limiting freedom wrong? And what I'm saying is the word wrong in this situation means the limiting of freedom. And it's not circular, it's a definition, right? When I say rape is wrong, what I mean is rape limits freedom. Now,
okay.
But you have to tell me how either you're not using the word wrong in the same way I am, i.e. just comparing.
So limitation, basically, you said limited.
No. Let me finish. I think I can be more clear. Because you're on the wrong track. I think you're answering the wrong question. So I use the word wrong to compare an action to some prescribed goal, and its definition. Wrong means contrary to freedom in my situation. You need to show me how you're not doing the very same thing with God, i.e. saying something is wrong. And what I mean by wrong is contrary to the nature of God, let's say.
Okay. So when we were talking about your position of non-theism, and when you make these moral arguments, you're acting inconsistently with your own worldview because there's no evidence to me for certain moral objective standards. And then on your own personal view of non-theism, there is no source for that. There is no evidence for that. So that comes from a false definition when you don't know that non-theism is true. So it logically follows that you're presupposing.
I'm not following. I'm sorry.
Is non-theism true?
It seems like when you're going on these. It seems like when you're going on these rants, you try to sneak in presuppositionalism, right? Where the fact that I accept that anything is true means I believe in God. And let me just nip this in the bud and say, for this argument, I'll accept that God exists, but not accept that morality has anything to do with God. So we both agree that the world exists, and if you say that I need to accept God to think that anything is true, then you know what? Fine. Like if that's what I need to do to get out of this presuppositionalist argument, which I'm not interested in having, then I'll do that. The reason I'm here is to discuss whether or not morality, what we call morality, is evidence for a God. Like, I know the debate title was, does morality prove God? But I think a more apt title, if you're going to try to be presuppositionalist, is morality evidence for God, or something like that. Because I'll just accept that God exists, not talk about presuppositionalism if that means we can actually talk about the topic.
Well, basically all you're saying is that what is true for you is not true for me.
No.
So what is true for me is that relativism is false. So that is true that is that true that relativism is false? So if you say no, then what is true for me is not true.
Are you talking about moral relativism or something else?
That's what I'm saying, is that basically there's what you're describing, because you didn't want to talk about presupposition. If you believe that everything is just true for me, and what is true for you is not true for me, so there's no absolute truth.
Okay, so what the whole, I just spoke for like 2 minutes on this. I I accept, for the sake of this discussion, that God exists, and somehow he is the way in which we can know things are correct, are accurately representing reality, right? So starting from a baseline of that, we can say, okay, there are facts of reality that are correct, and we could agree with them. Okay, so starting from there, now let's actually discuss whether or not morality is evidence for this God. So when you're saying, so something's true for you and it's not true for me, or things can be true, that's false. I'm not talking about truth. I'm talking about morality.
Yeah, we're talking about morality, and what we're trying to talk about is that the different worldviews that give rise to our definitions in our world. So we have to identify those categories of worldviews. That's why we're having such a hard time of the conversation. So what I'm trying to say, in your world of non-theism, I heard what you said about society and the principles and non-rape. We're just kind of summarizing about what you said. And what we're talking about of non-theism, there are no like books or science or evidence of that non-theism. So when you make these statements about Christianity, you're going to jump on my side, you're suddenly believe in God, and then go back to the non-theism position, that doesn't really calculate.
Okay, so I'm not going back to non-theism, right? Again, for the sake of this discussion, God exists, and he is somehow the way we know things are true. Okay, so can we move on from there? I'm not going to go back to non-theism. This isn't about non-theism. This is about whether or not morality is evidence for God.
So are you going to become a Christian after this debate?
No, I'm saying for the sake of argument, I will accept that God gives us reasons that things are true. Now, you either need to move on from there, like I'm hoping you do, or you need to somehow describe how, because of that fact, your ideas of objective morality are correct. Like you have to draw that, you have to bridge that gap. So those are your two options. Either we can continue talking about morality as we have been, accepting that things are true about reality and we can agree on them, observe them. Or you need to somehow say, aha, because you agree that God exists for the sake of argument, therefore you necessarily need to believe what I say about morality.
Well, what we're trying to say is that how can you have morality first before God? We're trying to say that we have to have God first and then morality. So because without God, you can't account for your logic or reason or rationality because you don't have a foundation for truth.
Okay, so I'll accept that, right? Without God, you can't have a foundation for your logic or truth. Okay, again, I accept all of this, but you have to tell me how that either proves your case about objective morality.
Oh, sure.
Or we can move on with that.
Unless you start with God, you can't even make sense of morality at all, or reason or truth, but you will borrow logic like you're doing from the God that you deny to deny him. So that's why you don't have any foundation, or your foundation for truth is subjective in a sense that is it impossible that you could be wrong about everything you know? Because if there is no absolute standard, how can you say that you can't be wrong about everything you know? So your foundation for truth is subjective. It changes as mine does not. His word says that you are certain that he is real. So the God of the Bible makes us certain.
I feel like you're not listening to what I'm saying about accepting the fact that God grounds truth. Like, can it be the case that God is the way that we could know things, right? He's the grounding for truth, or however presuppositionalists like to say it. Can it be the case that that is true, that is a fact, that God is this case, is the grounding, and also be the case that I'm using logic that he gave to describe how my ideas of subjective morality are correct? Can that be the case? Or am I, even using the logic he gave, am I somehow limited from defending my case?
No, you're not limited to defending your case, but how do you start with logic in the absence of God?
I'm accepting that you can't. For the sake of this argument, logic exists because God exists, necessarily. Like, that's fine. I'm not going to get baited into this presuppositionalist trap. God exists, and he grounds logic.
Okay, so
is morality evidence for that?
If you're jumping on the theist side now, then there are objective moral values or objective moral duties.
Demonstrate that.
Demonstrate that because those objective moral values are just like the laws of physics, and they're absolute, like the laws of
What does that mean?
gravity. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 is absolutely more. 4 is absolute.
I can prove that. That can be proved.
That's what I'm saying. Everybody universally accepted around the whole planet. So when you say demonstrate that, what we're trying to say is that I can demonstrate you the truth of that, but you won't be able to recognize it because you don't have a foundation for truth.
No, God is my foundation, right? God is my foundation.
So then you.
But morality.
I shouldn't have to demonstrate anything then. If tell me about God.
God exists and He's the foundation for all of logic and reality.
Okay, if you're jumping on my side, is there anything more to God than that?
I'm not talking. Okay, do you want to discuss whether or not morality is evidence that a God exists? Or do you want to talk about presuppositionalism? Like, what do you really want to do? Because it seems like I'm trying to move on to morality, which is what I wanted to do in the first place. And you just want to say, you just want to talk about presuppositionalism, which I'm not interested in, honestly.
But you just said you're jumping on my side that God existed, right?
Yes, I'm a theist who accepts that morality is just a way in which people evaluate actions according to a specified goal. And different societies choose different goals. And that's why, and people will ignore the goals of that society and that society's morality and harm them. I'm a theist who also thinks everything I said earlier in this discussion about morality. So I'm on your side just to get out of presuppositionalism. So
okay, well, there's things that are objectively wrong, and
explain what that means.
Okay, let me explain objectively wrong. Objectively wrong means that it's universally accepted in the whole planet that these things are objectively true and objectively wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about you, but certain atheists out in the world, they assume that their atheism is true, and they argue from those subjective relativism and those points of views. So it's a contradiction in terms. So what we're trying to say is that there are objective truths, and you asked me to demonstrate those objective truths. They can be demonstrated very easily by understanding the logical absolutes, and things are grounded through.
See, we're back in presuppositionalism.
That's my worldview, man. I mean, that's what we're going to talk about. That's God. If you're going to jump on my side,
so you are here to talk about presuppositionalism and not whether or not morality is evidence for God.
Well, that's the ramifications that follow when you deny a personal God. That's the moral first cause. The first one's very difficult.
The ramification of denying
it's very difficult to anchor an absolute moral law in the absence of God. I think that's why you have.
I'm saying there is no absolute moral law. You need to demonstrate that there is. Like, God exists, right? All of the presuppositionalist stuff, that's true, and that proves that shows that God exists. We need God for morality. Not for morality, I'm sorry, for logic. Demonstrate that line of thinking necessarily leads to your claims about objective morality being correct. I'm saying no bridging of that gap. You're saying if you accept God, then you say the word morality a couple times, and then you're back into presuppositionalism. Just saying that non-theists are true. There's no non-theist here at this point, right? It's just us two. We both believe in God. We both accept that He's the foundation of reality.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's the
morality.
We're trying to go with your definition that you said we both believe in God, and that's the definition of morality. But it's a contradiction.
No. Belief in God is not the definition of morality.
Okay, so let's just move on from what you were just trying to say. And let me clarify about the argument. It has nothing to do necessarily about believing in God or to be a good person or live a moral life. But we're not trying to say that you have to believe in God to live a moral life or have these objective standards. And if you do, then they are objective standards that ground morality in God, of course, because He's the one that's going to give us His salvation and give us His judgment if we do not follow His commands and His orders. And I know you might go back to the consequence thing, but there are consequences for evil and sin in the world. So my argument is that in the absence of God, the argument is that without God, there is no absolute standard of measurement of what's right and wrong, and therefore what you call your moral values are just this spins off of biological evolution.
Okay, so you're saying without God, there's no objective. I don't know why you're still talking about without God. I'm not for the sake of this argument, I'm not a non-theist. I accept that God exists. You have to tell me, you have to tell me how your ideas about objective morality, about morality being a comparison of action against an objective standard. Like,
well, listen to the argument again. What we're saying is that God must exist because of objective moral values exist.
yeah.
Number two would be, if God does not exist, then there are no objective moral values. So that's number one and number two.
Demonstrate claim one. What's an objective moral value? Okay, before you let you finish, or before I let you answer that, I believe you said twice so far that objective morals are those that are accepted by everyone at all times. Is that correct?
Universally accepted on the whole planet, yeah.
Okay, so give me an example of one of those.
It's objectively wrong to hurt someone to save a loved one. It's objectively wrong to, like you said, about rape, murder, suicide.
So if there's somebody that disagrees with you that it's objectively wrong, then that's not an objective moral, right?
That would be relative, like saying if someone disagrees that 2 + 2 is 4, they can disagree all they want. It's subjective. It wouldn't be true. So there's an objective truth that 2 + 2 is 4. So there's an objective standard of morality that there are objective truths that are objectively wrong. Otherwise, you just get arrested by the police.
You're not giving me anything demonstrable. Like you're confusing a whole bunch of different things. You said that an objective moral or an objective moral fact was that it's wrong to harm, let's just say to harm somebody for no reason, right? Like,
okay.
Okay. There are people on this planet that don't accept that.
I know.
Now, given your definition of what makes morality objective is that it's something that's accepted by everyone at all times, then that shows that that is not an objective moral, right? Because it's not accepted by everybody. Like, it's a contradiction. So you have to either give me an example of something that nobody disagrees with and nobody can disagree with, or you haven't demonstrated objective morals exist.
Okay. So basically what you're asking is a demonstration of objective morality. And what we're trying to say is that with God, there are standards that we can point to and say that is, say, when you say, ask me to demonstrate that. So when I demonstrate that, they are different forms of what's right, what would you consider right and wrong. And in Christianity, what we're trying to say is that unless you understand that you have a measurement of what's right and wrong, you can't say that this other person is in society is acting inconsistently with another person without maybe, let me just put it to you this way. Let's say you woke up tomorrow morning and you knew that they weren't no police. Would you go out and hurt someone? Now, what would be your answer to that? Because there's no police. What would ground morality if there was no police?
So I've answered this, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. What do you think I would answer to this? Like, just speculate. What am I about to say?
I'm pretty sure you're going to say you're going to go out and hurt someone because there's nothing to stop you, because that would be consistent of non-theism. There's nothing to ground morality.
You honestly think I'm going to say, if there were no rules, I would hurt somebody for no reason?
Yeah, but what would stop you?
So you asking what would stop me is not answering my question. Like, you honestly think that when you ask me the question, what would stop you? I would say, nothing. I'm going to be a shit. I'm going to harm others. Like, you honestly think that's what I'm going to say? Just to be clear.
Well, I'm not saying that you said that, but on your position, that would be the only answer. What would be the answer to ground?
So I'm not asking what you think the only option is for me to say. I'm saying, based on the discussion we just had, when you ask me, if there were no rules, what would you do? Like, what words are going to leave my mouth? What am I actually going to say? Not like what's based on what I've said, because I think you have a poor understanding of my argument. And if that's my fault for not explaining properly, then I apologize. But like, what do you actually think I'm going to say? Because it's definitely not, I'm going to hurt people.
Well, I'm pretty sure you're going to talk about the agreement and principles and society and things like that. And
be more specific. Like,
earlier you were talking about society and how there were different people together. They would have different principles, would consider what was moral, what was not moral. And it's more better to go by your definition of non-theism than jumping on my side, because you don't like the presupposition stuff, and that is my view. So you're not going to like that. So if we focus on your view, that
I'm still talking about what I was going to answer. I'm sorry. Like you went back into presuppositionalism like midway through your answer of what I was going to say. Okay, so I guess I'll stop trying to get you to say what I was going to say and just say it, right? If there were no rules, I don't even know what that means, right? Like, if there were no laws and no police and there's no one to physically stop me from harming people, the answer is no. I wouldn't harm people. What I would do is try to get together with a group of people who agree with me that it's most beneficial for all of us if we agree to not hurt people. And if anyone comes in contact with us that disagrees with us, then we will physically stop them if we can.
How do you know that those people that you trusted in your group won't betray you?
I don't.
1 second. We just want to mention we will be going to the Q&A in 2 minutes. Sorry to cut you guys off. Carry on.
James.
I don't, but in this post-apocalyptic world with no laws, it's kind of my only bet. And the truth is, if that were to happen right now, I would trust my coworkers. If it were to happen when I was at home, then I would get together with my closest friends and family. I would trust them. So, like, I know this is just a hypothetical, but
yeah,
to ask the question, how do you trust these people? How does that answer actually affect anything?
Oh, because but what we're trying to say is it wouldn't be absolute. If you're saying you could find if who cares, then someone could hurt you.
And they do.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be absolute on your view.
Yes, 100%. I never said it was absolute. My point was the fact that it's not absolute and these consequences you're giving of, oh, if it was absolute, then if it wasn't absolute, then somebody would just harm you or something. Like, that's what happens. If it wasn't absolute, you'd have people like Hitler. Oh, wait a second, we have people like Hitler.
If you know that someone will hurt you, then you can't claim to find a group of people to help you. If you know that someone's going to hurt you, that wouldn't be absolutely true.
What? I don't even know what that means. What?
You said you would find a group of people. You woke up tomorrow morning. There's no laws. There's no police. What would you do? You'd find a group of people that you had agreed upon, and then you would work with those people. But that wouldn't work because how do you know that is true?
See, that's another. How do I know what is true?
That you can trust those people.
I don't think it's true that I can trust those people. Like, it's a fact that I can trust them. Like, I can put my trust in them and take a risk, but I'm not saying it's true that they're not going to hurt me.
Because like in this hypothetical, that it wouldn't be no police. So the group of people that you would trust, that since there's no police, they could also hurt you too, right?
Okay, and that may happen. Like, okay,
how can you trust that? Waking up, there's no police, find a group of people. How do you trust that? There's no absolute standard.
How do you trust that? Like, that's an incoherent sentence. I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that. Like, the fact is, if there were no police, then I would try to get together the most trustworthy people I can who agree with me on how to rebuild society. And if somebody harms me while I'm doing this, then somebody harms me. I don't see how this gets us any closer.
My point is that you don't know that it's true. That finding a group of people will help you. You don't know that's true.
No, I do know that it's correct.
I think what we'll do is, I hate to interrupt, but just to get to as many questions as we can, we want to quick jump into it. So we appreciate you debaters. It's been really interesting. And let's see. Got a number of questions here, so I'm going to try to make sure I get these in order. And first, I forgot to mention, super chats. I always forget this. The super chats, we allow you can either ask a question or make a comment to one of the debaters, to which the debater would respond to. And also super chats, we always push them to the very front or top of the list. So no matter where we are, they just immediately go to the top. So thanks for your super chat. Snake was right. We appreciate it. He said, Skyout, didn't God reason to his moral standards? So I can read that again because I think that my tone maybe made it sound different. So he says, Skyout, didn't God reason to his moral standards?
Okay, did God reason to his moral standards? Of course, God is sovereign, and his moral standards are above us, and we have to work within the fallen system and the fallen man. And God works with covenants in the Old Testament of different covenants after one another, after the David covenant. There's so many covenants that God had to ordain and minister during that time period. So that would be one of the reasons why that God would do that.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And next up, by the way, Jenny, saw you subscribed. We're glad to have you here. Thanks for joining the crew. And yeah, so Maynard Saves, next question is question for Sky Out. How can morality be objective when the religion itself is subjective? I.e., 30-some thousand different cults of Christianity. Let's see. And then I'm trying to put this in the form of a question. So we'll go with that.
We'll go with that? Okay. Okay, what was the question? You said there's 30,000 denominations. How do I know?
I think, so I'll put it in this order. He says, objectivity can't define the doctrine. So how can morality be objective when the religion of Christianity itself is subjective in that it has 30,000 different cults or sub-denominations of Christianity?
Yeah, Christianity might be subjective because there's a lot of reformations, like the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Oneness Pentecostalism. But we can all go back and do hermeneutics and exegesis in the Bible to have the proper explanation of what is objectively true in context of what was written at the audience at that time. So that's how we can understand these different denominations. We can prove them false, and they're very, really easy. Once you break down Jehovah's Witness and Mormons down with the Bible, you can get done in 30 minutes to see an objective, which one's right, which one's wrong. Very easy by comparing the original documents of the Bible.
You got it. Next up, and I think we'll have, don't worry, promise, Candor, man, we'll have some for you. I'm confident. Adam Burt Colts, good to see you. Thanks for your question. He asked Sky Out, what makes what God thinks objectively moral versus just being special pleading? What if we found out Jesus thinks people raping each other was right?
Yeah, if Jesus thought raping each other was right, that would be clearly not what it says in the Bible. So even if I were to grant that, if Jesus thought that raping people would be right, obviously that would be wrong because it would be a false Jesus. I mean, there's many false Jesuses in the world that people believe in. The Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons, they believe that Jesus is the devil, his brother. So there's different subjective ways to say what would Jesus do, or a subjective idea in someone's mind of, oh, we're going to have a Jesus that rapes people. What would you do now? Would you do that? Of course I wouldn't, because that Jesus doesn't even exist. So it's a hypothetical presupposition and bias that's simply unrealistic.
Gotcha. Next up, Maynard Saves asks, question for you. Do you as a moderator and Christian have times you'd like to answer for Christianity, and do you ever feel befuddled at questions by atheists, or looked at your I think I might have missed the last part of the question. Sorry about that, Maynard Saves. But I definitely, since the copy and paste did capture the first part of that question, do I as a moderator have times when I'd like to answer for Christianity? I think the once in a while, it's pretty rare, to be honest. I think the reason it's rare is that a lot of philosophy is shaped by your perspective, and I think even intuitions and emotion at like a deep psychological level, so that I'm kind of like, I kind of understand that different people have different experiences which kind of influence their, like, even meanings of words in terms of how they understand them, things like that. And so it's like, it's surprisingly not too much. And there was only one where I was like, oh, I really want to, and it was just because it was pretty clearly, and I don't think the person meant it on purpose. I think they gave something that was just factually inaccurate. And this is something that, in either case, Christian or atheist, if somebody accidentally has a detail wrong, so if they say something in the Gnostic Gospels was in the biblical Gospels, the 4 synoptic Gospels, then or I should say the 4 New Testament Gospels, I would say I would want to correct it. In that case, I wanted to correct it in the same way I'd want to correct a Christian, because my hope is we get new ideas from the channel, but I don't want to like accidentally have a speaker by accident because I think the person was being well-intentioned. I don't want them to accidentally put out false information where people will be like, wait, Jesus like killed one of his childhood friends in the New Testament? It's like, no, that's not in the New Testament. That's in the Gnostic Gospels. So, like I said, they had good intentions. And then, do I ever feel befuddled at questions by atheists? There are definitely tough questions. Tom Jump and I had a discussion, because once in a while I debate, and Tom Jump, we were talking about basically the problem of evil, and I can't remember the exact question, but there was one in which I, at one point in the debate, I just said, I don't actually have an answer for that. I'll have to go look for it. And so, yeah, there are definitely questions where I'm like, yeah, it's either, maybe I haven't found the answer yet, or maybe I forgot, or whatever it is. So if that's what you mean by befuddled, I wouldn't say I'm usually too irritated, though. I think some people try to test me. I usually think of it as testing when sometimes people in the live chat grill me, or in the comments. But so yeah, I don't know. I usually try to keep that in mind. But anyway, thanks for that question. It's flattering to be involved, and thank you for that question. So John Peterson, we appreciate yours as well. He says, for Sky Out, if it was proven that God does not exist, would you become immoral and commit atrocious behavior such as rape, stealing, murdering, etc.? And
No.
and then hold on one second. And he says, and if not, why?
No. If I woke up tomorrow morning and I suddenly believe that God does not exist, I would not go out and hurt someone. Why? Because you can ground morality and empathy. And of course, you can just simply say, I choose not to. I don't like it. It's not in my conscience. It's not in my mind. I'm not going to hurt someone. Someone can hurt me. So, of course, I wouldn't do that. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow morning. Of course, I don't break the hypothetical, unrealistic presupposition and bias. I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly not believe in God and go hurt someone, because because I would be grounded by morality, by empathy in the absence of God, but that wouldn't be absolute. So the atheists that say that we can ground morality in Wittgenstein through empathy, it wouldn't be absolute because God would not exist, so those things would be subjective.
You got it. Thanks for that. And also, just saw you subscribed, Seek First His Kingdom. We appreciate you being here, and yeah, so stoked to have you join the community. Next up, question from Genius Tracks. Yes, we need a couple of questions here for Candor Man. He's wanting to get in on the action. So Genius Tracks asks, Sky Out, God changes moral standard from the Old Testament to the New. Does this not make morals subjective and relative to God's whims?
Not at all, because those, I'm not exactly sure what verses are you talking about, because when you go back and look at those moral laws, you can totally tell through the different covenants, through the Mosaic Law, through those different time periods. Of course, we don't do those atrocious things that we do in the Old Testament. And it doesn't say those moral laws are changed, that those things are acted because of those people who are working in the fallen system, the fallen man of mankind, since they're sinful and doing evil actions that God was punishing at that time period. So that would be my response to that.
Gotcha. And we do have a question for you, Candor Man. I appreciate your patience. I missed that one. Sorry. You've got Chester Copperbottom. We appreciate your question. He asks, question for Candor. Wouldn't it be simpler to say that an action is immoral if it causes bodily harm? And isn't there a distinction between causing harm and limiting freedom?
I think it would be simpler to use freedom instead of bodily harm. Just because I personally feel like freedom is a lot better defined. And let's say somebody wants their body to be harmed, I think it's not immoral to have that person, I think it would be immoral to limit that person's freedom to harm themselves if they wanted to. Like what is considered harm in the first place, right? Is ear piercing harm? I wouldn't really have an issue with it if somebody said, oh, it's immoral to cause bodily harm to people. It's got enough overlap with limiting freedom for it to be just as effective in achieving the goal that I am referring to when I use the word morality. I just think freedom may be a little bit better of a way to get to it.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And next one up, Andrew Thoppel. Forgive me if I mispronounced it. He says, "Sky out, what if on another planet they have a moral system that can be shown with evidence to be superior to that of the Bible? Is it not immoral to reject that planet's moral system?"
Wow. If there's another planet that has a higher, superior morality than the God of the Bible, I've never heard of this planet, but even if it were true, it wouldn't have any significance of the God of the Bible, since he created everything, and those things that they're talking about, planets, were created by the God I'm talking about. So he would be a higher God than their subjective morality on this hypothetical planet.
Gotcha. We appreciate that. Then JMD Apologetics 101. Good to see ya. Thanks for stopping by. He asked, "Does Candor Man believe in free will?"
Libertarian free will, I think, is indistinguishable from actions caused by randomness. I think when I use the word will, and sometimes free will, although I don't like using the word free so much anymore because this whole theological debate. When I use the word will, I mean the ability for what we call an individual to act not impeded by any actions caused by other things we call individuals. So I don't see any reason to think that our minds or bodies aren't equally subject to the laws of physics as anything else. So it's kind of compatibilistic, where although we are not free to act against the laws of physics, those laws of physics and the things that are reacting to those laws, the things that make us us, that is free, or potentially free to act, not being affected by other masses of atoms that we call other people.
Gotcha. And with that, we actually are going to wrap up. We've got a couple of house cleaning things, and I want to say thanks so much to the debaters we know they love debating, and I do too. I kind of envy. I want to jump in myself sometimes, but even though they enjoy it, we thank them for coming on and enjoying it here at Modern Day Debate. So glad to have them here. And I don't think I mentioned, forgive me, I'm sorry, their links are in the description. So if you would love to check out more of their stuff, you can find their link down below. And even if you don't like them, even if you're like, "Oh, that Skyo just drives me nuts," well, he'll grow on you. You can check out his link and you might find you like him. So yeah, anyway, even if you don't agree though, you could at least hear their case from them personally, and so you could say it's the strongest representation of their case because it's straight from the source. With that, also want to mention tonight we will have an interesting and brand new debate we've never had, which is whether a monarchy, namely a nation led by a king, or a democracy is better. This is for real. There are still people out there, and I don't mean to say that in any sort of way like it's outdated, because, by the way, I've heard this great quote that reminds me of that, because I am, in some ways, I'm old-fashioned, is we don't say things are necessarily old-fashioned because they're outdated, but because they've just worked for so long. And anyway, we have a gentleman who, he actually is arguing for monarchy tonight, so namely that a nation is best led by a king, and the other one will be arguing for democracy, and that would be Adam-friended and pragmatic culture. So that would be a lot of fun. Very excited for it. And then, just a quick reminder, it's true, I think I saw in the live chat, someone thought that maybe we weren't as partisan as we could be. We try to be. We're absolutely okay with being held accountable, so call us out if you don't think we are. And it's true, the chat moderators will give their opinions, and some of our moderators are Christians, some of them are atheists, and some of them are one of the many different creatures in between. We got like a neo-pagan that swings by once in a while, and so we just kind of let the chat moderators say whatever they want, because it's like, well, it's kind of balanced in the sense that we have some Christians, some atheists, some all sorts of other things. So it's really just me that's trying to not give any sort of like swaying one way. So with that, I want to say thanks for being here. We appreciate it, and keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Hope you have a good night, everybody.